Welcome, dear listener, and thank you for settling in for a tale that promises both intrigue and comfort. Tonight, we journey together into the fog-laden countryside of England, to a place steeped in history and mystery, Eversham Abbey. Its stone walls have witnessed centuries of secrets, whispers of long-forgotten events, and the occasional shadow that seems almost alive under the pale moonlight. Within these ancient halls, a puzzling disappearance has shaken the household, leaving questions that only a keen mind like Sherlock Holmes can hope to untangle. At the center of it all lies a curious artifact, the Bloodstone, a gem said to carry more than mere beauty, perhaps even a story of misfortune or hidden intent. So, as you settle into a quiet corner, perhaps with a warm cup of tea or by a gentle fire, allow the soft rhythms of this mystery to draw you in. Together, we shall step carefully into the shadows of Eversham Abbey, one secret at a time. Chapter 1. Arrival at Eversham Abbey. The morning mist hung low over the rolling hills as Holmes and I made our way toward Eversham Abbey. The countryside, usually so familiar and serene, seemed almost ethereal under the soft veil of fog, each tree and cottage rendered in muted tones that blurred the line between reality and something just out of reach. As our carriage trundled along the winding road, the rhythmic clip-clop of the horses' hooves became a steady heartbeat, a quiet companion to the growing sense of anticipation. I stole glances at Holmes, his eyes alert and observant even in the gentle calm of dawn, noting the way he seemed to perceive more than the eye could see. Passing through the tiny villages scattered along our route, we encountered doors half open, smoke curling lazily from chimneys, and shutters rattling against the morning breeze. Villagers moved about their routines with an air of subtle apprehension, and occasionally one would cast a fleeting glance toward the road, as if expecting, no, fearing, something we were yet to understand. Rumors drifted to us in whispered fragments, a shadowy figure seen slipping along the abbey's periphery, strange noises in the dead of night, and hushed talk of the fabled Bloodstone, a gem of such rarity that even the mention of it seemed to ripple through the air. I found myself reflecting on the peculiarity of rural life, where the ordinary rhythm of chores and greetings could coexist with such layered unease. Holmes spoke little, but every now and then he would comment on the unusual patterns in the villagers' expressions or the architecture of the buildings, each observation carrying a hint of portent. The winding road seemed endless, yet comforting in its familiarity, each bend revealing glimpses of pastures kissed by frost, streams shivering under a thin layer of ice, and hedgerows that had stood unchanged for decades. By the time the abbey came into view, perched solemnly atop a gentle rise and shrouded in mist that clung stubbornly to its stone walls, a peculiar hush had settled over the land. The tall towers and ivy-laden facades appeared both majestic and forbidding, hinting at secrets hidden in shadowed alcoves or behind ancient doors. Even from a distance, one could sense that the abbey carried its own weight of history and, perhaps, its share of sorrow. Holmes, ever the keen observer, noted the faint signs of recent disturbance, a door slightly ajar, a garden path less tended than the others, and I felt a shiver of anticipation, a mixture of curiosity and subtle unease that seemed to reach even through the soft morning air. As we approached the main entrance, the mist curling around our feet and the hoofs' echoes fading into silence, I felt a strange combination of comfort and suspense. The countryside, though tranquil, had prepared us for what lay ahead, a mystery woven into the very stones of Eversham Abbey. And so, with the carriage slowing and the gates looming before us, I could not help but wonder what shadows we might uncover, what stories whispered through the halls, and whether the Bloodstone itself would reveal more than its shimmering beauty, perhaps even the first thread in a tapestry of secrets yet to unfold. The heavy oak doors of Eversham Abbey groaned as Holmes pushed them open, their hinges protesting after years of use. Immediately, a draught swept through the entrance hall, carrying the faint scent of old wood, polished stone, and something less definable, perhaps the faint trace of smoke or wax from centuries past. I followed closely behind, my eyes drawn to the towering arches and ornate moldings that spoke of wealth, history, and a certain austere elegance. Every corner seemed to hold a story, and yet there was a quiet tension in the air, as though the abbey itself were aware of our intrusion. Holmes moved with careful deliberation, his gaze sweeping over the details that would escape most eyes. The patterned tiles on the floor were slightly uneven, worn by countless footsteps. The shadows beneath the carved wooden banisters seemed to linger longer than they ought. I noticed the slight gap where a painting had once hung, its absence striking against the otherwise meticulously arranged gallery. Holmes paused, his expression unreadable, and I sensed that even these small discrepancies had significance in his mind. As we wandered through the labyrinthine hallways, each turn revealed more of the abbey's grandeur and peculiarities. Faded tapestries hung along stone walls, depicting scenes of long-past hunts and noble gatherings, yet one seemed oddly out of place, the figures slightly blurred, as though the artist had never fully finished the work. Doors lined the corridors, some slightly ajar, others locked with locks that seemed unusually modern for a building of such age. Holmes's fingers traced the edges of one particularly sturdy door, noting its subtle inconsistencies, while I felt a chill as if the very walls were listening to our presence. The creak of floorboards echoed beneath our steps, each sound amplified in the cavernous halls, and I began to notice small, deliberate noises, perhaps the settling of the building, perhaps something else entirely. Holmes's keen ear twitched at every whisper of movement, every muted thump from above, and I realized that these echoes, so ordinary to the casual observer, were threads in a tapestry of hidden events. There was a rhythm here, a quiet pulse that suggested the abbey was far more alive than its silence allowed. Even the light seemed to play a part in the abbey's secrets. Slanting rays from the tall, narrow windows fell unevenly across the stone floors, illuminating dust motes that drifted lazily in the air. Shadows pooled in corners and beneath staircases, making familiar objects appear unfamiliar. Holmes noted these effects with a subtle nod, as if they were small clues, guiding our attention to corners and recesses where something might be concealed. By the time we reached the main hall, the atmosphere had fully enveloped us. The abbey felt imposing yet welcoming, majestic yet whispering of hidden dangers. I could not help but feel that every missing object, every locked door, every deliberate echo was a small invitation to look closer, to question what we saw, and to prepare for the mysteries that awaited. As Holmes silently catalogued each oddity, I understood that Eversham Abbey itself was a character in this unfolding tale, its stones and shadows holding secrets that only patience and perception could reveal. And so we stood, on the threshold of discovery, ready to follow wherever the corridors might lead. Chapter 2. The Disappearance. The drawing-room of Eversham Abbey was a study in quiet elegance, with tall windows draped in heavy velvet, the fading sunlight casting long shadows across richly patterned rugs. Lady Eversham sat near the hearth, her fingers twisting the edge of a lace handkerchief as she spoke, her voice tinged with both worry and disbelief. "It is unlike him to vanish so abruptly," she murmured, glancing toward the empty doorway where young Samuel, the Abbey's heirloom keeper, had last been seen. The household had gathered around, faces etched with concern, some trying to maintain composure, others unable to conceal the anxiety that rippled through the room. Holmes observed quietly, his sharp eyes moving from Lady Eversham to the assembled family, noting subtle gestures, a fidgeting hand, a gaze that lingered too long on a particular object, a slight hesitation before answering. "When was he last seen?" Holmes asked softly, his tone calm but probing. Lady Eversham recounted the morning's events, describing Samuel's routine with precise detail, yet her words trembled slightly at the memory of his sudden absence. Watson, seated nearby, took in the warmth of the room, the gentle crackle of the fire, the familiar scent of polished wood and old books, while also sensing the tension that seemed to hover like a delicate, invisible veil. Amid the conversation, a few peculiar details surfaced. A small brass key lay on the floor, out of place among the scattered papers and letters on the side table. Holmes's eyes lingered on it briefly, a faint hint of a smile crossing his face, as though he recognized its quiet significance. A half-finished letter, addressed to an unknown recipient, rested nearby, the ink still damp enough to suggest it had been written only hours before. Lady Eversham mentioned in passing that Samuel had sometimes hinted at the existence of a secret passage within the Abbey, a notion dismissed lightly by others at the time, but which now carried a weight of possibility that seemed to linger in the air. Holmes's questions were measured, deliberate. He inquired about Samuel's recent behavior, the places he frequented in the Abbey, and any unusual interactions he might have had with visitors or staff. Each answer revealed layers of normalcy and subtle irregularity, a blend that Holmes often found most illuminating. Watson, ever the observer of human nature, noted the mixture of relief and anxiety on the faces of those present. The comfort of family surrounding one another contrasted with the unease that the unknown always brings. The conversation shifted naturally from past routines to the moments leading up to the disappearance, each detail adding texture to the story forming in Holmes's mind. A drawer left slightly ajar, a book misplaced on a shelf, and a set of footprints leading toward the east wing all seemed trivial at first glance, yet Holmes's focused attention suggested otherwise. As Lady Eversham's voice wavered, revealing the depth of her worry, there was a human warmth in the room, a shared concern, a collective desire for resolution, that softened the tension even as the mystery deepened. By the time the discussion drew to a pause, subtle threads of the unfolding puzzle had been laid bare. A misplaced key, a half-written letter, whispered speculation about secret passageways, and the sudden, inexplicable absence of a devoted young caretaker, all hints that beckoned Holmes to piece them together. Watson felt the weight of anticipation pressing gently against the cozy atmosphere of the drawing-room, a gentle reminder that behind the warmth and civility of the household lay shadows yet to be explored. And so, as the family settled into uneasy calm, I sensed that the Abbey itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Holmes to unravel the first delicate threads of its mystery. The Abbey had settled into a hushed slumber when Holmes suggested we take a quiet walk through its corridors, searching for any clue that might shed light on Samuel's sudden disappearance. Candlelight flickered along the walls, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to twist and stretch with every step. The air was cool and carried faint scents of aged wood, old parchment, and a trace of something sharper, perhaps the lingering memory of a fire long burned out. Each footfall echoed softly across stone floors, a gentle rhythm that felt both comforting and slightly ominous, as though the Abbey itself were guiding us through its secrets. We moved carefully from the main hall into the library, a vast room lined with shelves that reached high toward the vaulted ceiling. Dust motes danced in the flickering light as Holmes's gaze swept over every surface, noting subtle irregularities. A book slightly askew, a faint indentation on the rug, a door that had been closed too firmly to be accidental. I could not help but admire the quiet reverence with which Holmes approached the task, his movements precise, his mind clearly racing ahead of our footsteps. I, for my part, felt the familiar mix of curiosity and delight, the kind that accompanies an unexpected adventure yet is tempered by the gentle comfort of companionship. As we progressed down the narrow, twisting corridors, a cold draught seeped through the cracks in the stone walls, carrying faint echoes of distant sounds. A floorboard creaked in the distance, and I found myself pausing, straining to determine whether it was merely the building settling or if someone, or something, had passed this way moments before. Holmes, however, seemed unperturbed. His eyes caught a subtle scuff mark near a side door, a detail most would have overlooked. He knelt, examining it carefully, tracing its shape with the tip of a gloved finger, before straightening with that familiar glimmer of satisfaction that comes from noticing what others miss. In the corner of one library alcove, my attention was drawn to a small glint partially hidden in the patterned carpet. Holmes moved closer and revealed a blood-red gemstone, its surface catching the flickering candlelight like a tiny flame. "The Bloodstone," he murmured, more to himself than to me, though I felt the weight of its significance instantly. The gem seemed almost to pulse in the dim glow, a silent witness to the unseen events that had transpired within these walls. I could not help but marvel at its beauty, while a shiver ran down my spine at the implications of its presence. Even as we examined the stone, whispers seemed to drift from the far reaches of the Abbey, faint, indecipherable, yet unervingly persistent. Holmes remained calm, walking toward a nearby hallway that appeared to lead to a service wing. I followed, offering gentle observations of the faded tapestries and carved moldings that lined the walls, injecting the occasional light-hearted comment to ease the tension, reminding us both that we were, after all, guests in this grand, yet mysterious, home. By the time we concluded our search for the night, the Abbey had revealed more of its character. Hidden marks, secret paths, and the enigmatic Bloodstone, but it had also left enough unanswered questions to keep our curiosity alive. Walking back to the drawing-room, I felt that delicate balance between suspense and comfort, between wonder and familiarity, that only an old, storied place like Eversham Abbey could provide. Holmes moved silently beside me, already piecing together the hints, while I reflected on the strange delight of exploring shadows alongside a friend whose mind worked like a finely tuned instrument. The night was far from over, and yet, in those quiet, flickering corridors, the Abbey had begun to speak. Chapter 3. The Bloodstone Legend. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the tall, dusty windows of Eversham Abbey study, illuminating shelves crowded with leather-bound volumes whose spines bore the names of generations long past. Holmes and I sat at a massive oak table, strewn with yellowed papers, brittle letters, and diaries whose bindings creaked when opened. The atmosphere was steeped in history. Even the faint scent of ink and aging parchment seemed to whisper of secrets waiting patiently for discovery. As I leafed through one particularly delicate diary, I could not help but feel a sense of awe, the kind that arises when ordinary life intersects with centuries of mystery. Holmes's eyes, sharp and discerning, scanned each line with meticulous care. The first entries we examined described the acquisition of the Bloodstone, a gem whose deep red facets seemed almost to hold a heartbeat of their own. Early records suggested it had been brought to the Abbey by a distant relative, a collector with an almost obsessive fascination for rare treasures. According to these accounts, misfortunes followed those who came into possession of the gem. Livestock died unexpectedly, valuable correspondence vanished, and mysterious illnesses seemed to appear without cause. Holmes made no comment at first, yet his steady focus implied that he found patterns within these seemingly unrelated incidents. As I read aloud passages from a diary dated 2 centuries prior, I noticed the careful attention given to precise dates, locations, and events. One entry, in particular, described a clandestine meeting in the Abbey's eastern wing, where a whispered argument over the gem ended in a disappearance that was never explained. The language of the diary was formal and deliberate, yet beneath the careful phrasing lay a thread of unease that made the events feel unervingly immediate. I glanced at Holmes, whose steely gaze did not waver, and realized that he was quietly weaving these fragments into a larger understanding, linking the past with the present in ways only he could discern. Among the records, I found letters that hinted at attempts to hide or protect the Bloodstone, its presence both coveted and feared. One letter, half-torn and stained, spoke of a curse associated with the gem, a warning that those who sought to claim it through deceit or greed would find misfortune visiting them in unexpected forms. Reading these words aloud, I felt a shiver of both fascination and apprehension. The line between legend and reality seemed perilously thin. Holmes leaned forward, tracing the ink with a finger, as if the movement itself would draw out hidden meaning, and I marveled at his ability to find significance in the minutest details. The slant of a letter, the repetition of a name, the peculiar way a phrase had been underlined. As the hours passed, the study became a sanctuary for curiosity. Every diary, every ledger, every forgotten note revealed layers of the Abbey's history, each intertwined with the elusive Bloodstone. Holmes's commentary was minimal but incisive, highlighting connections that were invisible to the casual observer. A misfortune in one century mirrored a small but notable disturbance in another. A family dispute left traces in handwriting styles and repeated phrases, and, most strikingly, events in these old accounts bore an uncanny resemblance to the current disappearance that had brought us here. The convergence of past and present created a subtle tension, an awareness that the Abbey's walls had observed patterns repeating across decades, patterns we were only beginning to perceive. Even in the quiet moments when Holmes was silent, the room seemed to pulse with history. I reflected on the lives that had passed through these corridors, the small triumphs and tragedies that had left their mark in ink and memory. The Bloodstone itself, though physically small, carried with it a weight far greater than its size, a history of human desire, folly, and secrecy that demanded careful attention. I felt both humbled and exhilarated to witness these revelations unfold, to touch the edges of a story that had begun long before our arrival and which, I sensed, would continue to reveal itself in layers, guiding us toward truths hidden within shadows of the past. By the time we set aside the final diary for the evening, a tapestry of history had been drawn before us, threads of misfortune, whispers of curses, and the subtle intersections of lives separated by decades yet united by the enigmatic Bloodstone. Holmes's thoughtful gaze lingered on a ledger, his mind quietly piecing together what would soon become a clearer pattern. And as I closed the last volume, I felt the comforting weight of discovery mingled with the thrill of the unknown, aware that the legend we had uncovered might be more fact than mere folklore, its tendrils stretching from the past directly into the unfolding mystery of Eversham Abbey. As evening fell over the misted hills surrounding Eversham Abbey, Holmes and I took a brief walk into the nearby village, hoping to gather what insights we could from those who had lived in its shadow for decades. The cottages, snug and smoke-wreathed, seemed almost to lean toward us as we passed, their windows reflecting the pale glow of lanterns swinging gently in the breeze. Villagers emerged from their doors cautiously, their movements tentative, as though unsure whether our questions would bring comfort or stir old fears. It was here, amid the familiar warmth of hearthlit homes, that stories began to surface, stories of lights that danced across the Abbey's upper towers in the dead of night, and of disappearances that seemed to span generations, each whispered tale punctuated with a glance toward the looming silhouette of stone and ivy above. Holmes listened with the careful patience that I had come to recognize, his eyes narrowing slightly at moments when contradictions crept into the villagers' accounts. One elder spoke of a flickering light that had hovered near the east wing, claiming it appeared only when no one was watching closely. Another insisted the light had been steady, almost lantern-like, as if someone had been walking the parapets deliberately. Holmes's gaze shifted from one storyteller to another, noting the slight inconsistencies, the variations in timing, and the subtle embellishments that grew more pronounced with each retelling. Yet, rather than dismiss these tales outright, he catalogued them, tracing patterns and anomalies that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. I, meanwhile, felt a curious mixture of unease and comfort as I listened, recounting the tales to myself in my mind with the cadence of a fireside story. There was a strange reassurance in the rhythm of these legends, the repetition of eerie events, the communal acknowledgment of fear, and the gentle humor that often slipped into the villagers' reflections on their own nervousness. The narrative of the Abbey, as told by those who lived under its shadow, had a heartbeat of its own, slow and steady yet punctuated with quick, surprising thumps, the very pulse of curiosity and suspense that drew us in. A caretaker, an older man with a stooped posture and eyes bright with the sharpness of long experience, offered a particularly intriguing hint. He spoke of chambers below the Abbey, long-forgotten passageways and cellars whose entrances had been sealed or concealed over generations. His tone was cautious, respectful of the Abbey's solemnity, yet there was a flicker of mischief in his voice as he suggested that not all secrets remained hidden by choice. Holmes's eyes lit briefly with interest, and I noted the quickening of his mind, as though he were already plotting the method of exploration, silently calculating the paths we might follow when the Abbey yielded its subterranean mysteries. As we turned to leave, the villagers' stories continued to echo in my mind, each tale layering upon the last, forming a tapestry both comforting in its familiarity and unsettling in its implications. The lights, the disappearances, the subtle contradictions, and the whispered hints of hidden chambers, together, they suggested that the Abbey was far more than a grand residence of stone and ivy. It was a repository of histories, both known and forgotten, a living puzzle that would soon demand careful examination. Walking back toward the Abbey through the dimly lit streets, I could feel the anticipation building, a quiet thrill mingled with the warmth of shared human experience. Holmes was already deep in thought, cataloguing each detail, while I allowed myself to savor the strange, comforting cadence of these tales, knowing that each step brought us closer to uncovering what lay beneath the Abbey's solemn exterior. Chapter 4: Secrets in the Shadows. The flickering candlelight cast long, wavering shadows along the stone walls of the Abbey's east wing as Holmes paused before a tapestry depicting a hunting scene from centuries past. The fabric was heavy, its colors muted with age, and it hung slightly uneven, as though disturbed more recently than its threadbare appearance suggested. Holmes ran a careful finger along the edge, and with a subtle tug, the tapestry shifted to reveal the outline of a door, perfectly concealed within the wall. A thrill of anticipation ran through me, mingled with the apprehension I always felt when the Abbey seemed to breathe its secrets around us. Holmes produced a small key from his coat, examining the lock briefly before sliding it into place. The door swung open silently, revealing a narrow passageway that wound downward into darkness. The air was damp and carried the scent of cold stone and faint mildew, yet it seemed alive, as if whispering the stories of those who had passed through long ago. My footsteps echoed softly as I followed Holmes, each sound amplified in the tight, twisting corridor. The passage was lined with irregular stone, rough to the touch, and the walls occasionally dripped moisture that glistened in the candlelight. I confess, a slight tremor ran through me at times, imagining unseen eyes watching from the shadows or the distant echo of footsteps that might not belong to us. Holmes moved with steady confidence, his hand brushing lightly against the walls as he mapped the space with his keen senses. Each twist and turn revealed new corners, small niches that could hide objects, or secrets far more troubling. My imagination wandered, as it often does in such settings, conjuring half-formed shapes that vanished the instant I blinked. Yet even in my unease, there was comfort in the companionship beside me, the quiet assurance that Holmes's calm and measured presence could navigate any danger the Abbey might conceal. The passage opened into a small chamber, its ceiling low and lined with wooden beams blackened with age. Dust covered the floor in thin, almost deliberate patterns, as though disturbed recently yet left unexamined. I noticed faint marks along the stones, indentations in the floor that suggested a heavy object had been moved or a hurried footstep that did not belong to any ordinary visitor. Holmes knelt to examine one particularly curious scuff, his eyes narrowing as he traced its subtle curve. "Interesting," he murmured, almost to himself, "and yet consistent with nothing we have encountered above." I could feel the weight of his attention, the invisible thread connecting this hidden chamber to the larger mystery that had begun to unfold across the Abbey. As we pressed onward, the passage narrowed, winding sharply to the left and then the right, forcing us to bend and shuffle along the uneven floor. Water dripped from the walls, forming tiny pools that reflected our candlelight in shifting patterns, creating illusions of movement in the shadows. Each turn seemed to conceal possibilities, doors that might open onto forgotten rooms, niches holding objects of significance, or perhaps clues to Samuel's disappearance and the Bloodstone. My heart beat a little faster with each bend, a mixture of suspense and anticipation that was both exhilarating and grounding. By the time we retraced our steps toward the Abbey's main corridors, the hidden passage had revealed its secrets sparingly, yet significantly. The echoes of our footsteps still lingered, mingling with imagined sounds of long-past movements and hushed voices. Holmes's methodical reasoning, quiet and precise, provided a tether to the unknown, while my own apprehension lent a warmth to our shared exploration, balancing fear with companionship. In that twisting, damp labyrinth, I realized that Eversham Abbey's shadows held not only secrets but a story that waited patiently for discovery, one measured step at a time. The passageway's twists had grown narrower, forcing our shoulders close to the damp stone walls, when a sudden movement ahead caught both our eyes. In the dim candlelight, a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall silhouette, cloaked and deliberate, stepping with measured pace as if it had anticipated our presence. Holmes froze, his expression unreadable but alert, and I felt the familiar thrill of tension mingled with apprehension that always accompanied these unexpected encounters. The air seemed to thicken, carrying the faint scent of smoke and something metallic, a subtle warning of unseen intentions. "Who goes there?" Holmes's voice was calm, even, but carried an authority that seemed to ripple through the narrow corridor. The figure hesitated, and in that moment I could see a flash of eyes reflecting the candlelight, sharp and wary. A response came, soft and indistinct, more a hiss than a word, as though the speaker measured each sound carefully. The presence of another in this hidden passage, and at such a late hour, intensified the sense that the Abbey's secrets were far from dormant. My hand instinctively gripped the candle, its flicker throwing the figure's shadow across the walls, magnifying the tension. Holmes advanced slowly, his steps deliberate, yet the figure recoiled, moving back with a grace that suggested familiarity with the labyrinthine passages. I followed closely, heart thudding in a mixture of excitement and caution. Then, in a sudden flurry, the figure turned and darted down a side passage we had not noticed, vanishing into the darkness. The sound of footsteps echoed and faded, leaving only the faint rustle of air disturbed by their flight. I felt a momentary pang of disappointment, tempered by intrigue. This unexpected encounter had introduced a new player to the Abbey's quiet drama, one whose motives and identity were as mysterious as the Bloodstone itself. Where the figure had stood, something caught my eye on the stone floor, a small piece of folded parchment, hastily left behind. I picked it up and unfolded it carefully, revealing a cryptic note written in a hurried, angular script. The words were few but precise. Bloodstone, 12th of November. Remember. My pulse quickened as I read aloud to Holmes, who studied the message with his customary intensity. Every element of the note suggested a deliberate warning, a piece of a puzzle that demanded attention, a thread leading deeper into the Abbey's enigma. Questions surged. Who had left it? What significance did the date hold? And how was this figure connected to the gem and the recent disappearance? Despite the tension, there was a warmth in the shared discovery, the quiet companionship that had carried us through countless mysteries. I felt the familiar reassurance of Holmes's methodical mind beside me, analyzing, deducing, and cataloguing possibilities, while I, in turn, observed, recorded, and reflected, offering a human anchor to the unfolding suspense. The Abbey, with its twisting passages, hidden chambers, and now this enigmatic visitor, seemed to pulse with life, its shadows alive with secrets waiting to be unveiled. We retraced our steps toward the main corridors, the note safely in Holmes's hand, each footfall echoing softly, mingling tension with the steady rhythm of companionship. The encounter had left as many questions as it had answered, yet it also provided a spark of discovery that propelled us forward. In that dim, echoing passage, the Abbey had once again reminded us that even its oldest stones and darkest corners were not without purpose, and that every shadow might hold a story, a warning, or a clue waiting to illuminate the path ahead. Chapter 5. The Puzzle Deepens. Holmes spread the cryptic note across the oak table, placing the bloodstone beside it so that the red gleam caught the candlelight, casting a subtle reflection onto the yellowed pages around us. He studied both carefully, his eyes narrowing slightly as he traced the angular letters of the hastily scribbled message. "Observe, Watson," he said softly, almost to himself. "The simplicity of the words belies their depth. Bloodstone, 12th of November. Remember." At first glance, one might dismiss this as a mere reminder, yet there is precision here that demands analysis. I leaned closer, eager to follow his line of thought, feeling the familiar thrill of joining in the quiet intellectual exercise that he seemed to conduct so naturally. Holmes began by connecting the note to the gemstone itself. He noted the gem's recent discovery in the hidden passage and its alignment with both the Abbey's architecture and historical records we had uncovered earlier. "The placement is intentional," he murmured. "Our visitor, or perhaps a member of the household, chose the passage and the stone deliberately. The bloodstone is not merely an ornament, it is a signpost, a marker pointing toward further information." His calm, deliberate explanation drew me into the mystery, allowing me to trace each step of deduction as if I were a participant in his reasoning. Next, Holmes examined the date mentioned in the note. "The 12th of November," he said, tapping the paper lightly. "Historical records show no immediate event on this day, yet patterns emerge when one considers the cycles of correspondence, arrivals, and departures at Eversham Abbey over the past century. The date likely signifies something recurring, perhaps a family tradition, a meeting, or even a misfortune tied to the bloodstone itself." I listened attentively, noting how he wove together strands of history, present events, and human behavior, transforming fragments of information into a coherent map of possibility. Holmes's reasoning extended to the patterns within the Abbey. He pointed out faint scuff marks in corridors, areas where the tapestry had been disturbed, and subtle signs in furniture placement that suggested repeated movement in particular directions. Each observation seemed minor in isolation, yet together they formed a trail, a series of breadcrumbs leading toward the deeper truths hidden in the Abbey's stone and shadowed recesses. "The mind must not overlook the ordinary," he said quietly, his voice imbued with certainty. "The extraordinary often reveals itself through the most mundane of signs." As he explained, I felt a gentle satisfaction in following each realization. The sense of progress, of small victories in uncovering hidden meanings, was comforting, even as the larger mystery remained unresolved. We paused briefly, considering a faint pattern emerging in the alignment of doors, hidden passages, and the placement of objects connected to Samuel's disappearance. Holmes pointed out how the bloodstone itself might serve as a key, a symbol to signal knowledge only the initiates could interpret. Each step seemed deliberate, each clue purposeful, and yet there was still room for the shadows to conceal further complexity. By the time our discussion concluded, a clearer picture had begun to form. The cryptic note, the gemstone, and the subtle patterns throughout the Abbey hinted at a design both intelligent and layered, inviting careful attention and patient observation. Holmes's reasoning, methodical yet fluid, allowed me to experience the thrill of deduction alongside him, to understand the significance of details that might otherwise escape notice. I felt a warmth in the shared discovery, a comfort in the measured engagement of the mind, knowing that with each insight we moved closer to unraveling the mysteries that Eversham Abbey had long held, and that each revelation would prepare us for the deeper puzzles yet to come. Night had fully descended over Eversham Abbey, and the corridors that had seemed so grand and stately by day now took on a different character. Shadows stretched longer, whispers of air moved through the halls with unexpected intention, and the faint glimmer of candlelight cast dancing patterns on the worn stone floors. Holmes and I moved quietly, our footsteps muted against the cold surfaces, each creak and sigh of the building magnified in the stillness. There was a peculiar vitality to the Abbey at this hour, a sense that its walls and passages were alive with memories, secrets, and perhaps even the faint echoes of those who had walked here before. As we explored the dimly lit hallways, Holmes paused repeatedly, his sharp eyes catching subtle irregularities, a door slightly out of alignment, a faint trail of dust disturbed, a niche that seemed unnecessarily deep. I, for my part, followed with a mixture of admiration and cautious apprehension, occasionally offering light commentary to ease the tension. "One might think these walls have ears," I whispered, half in jest, though a shiver ran down my spine at the very idea. Holmes merely inclined his head, his focus unwavering, as if he already understood the Abbey's secrets better than anyone had dared to imagine. It was in a side corridor, partially concealed behind a panel that blended seamlessly with the surrounding woodwork, that we found the hidden study. The door gave way with a faint click, revealing a small room lined with shelves of neatly arranged letters and documents. The scent of old paper and ink was comforting in a strange way, a reminder that even the most intricate mysteries are built upon the simplest materials: words, records, and human intent. Holmes moved directly to the shelves, inspecting the letters with meticulous care, while I wandered to a desk cluttered with envelopes, noting seals that bore unfamiliar insignia and handwriting that suggested both haste and secrecy. As I leafed through a stack of correspondence, I discovered letters detailing meetings and arrangements for what appeared to be a secret society connected to the Abbey. Names, dates, and subtle references to the Bloodstone were woven throughout, hinting at a deeper network of influence and intrigue that extended beyond what we had yet observed. Holmes, meanwhile, had uncovered a small notebook filled with observations and cryptic annotations, which he examined with his characteristic intensity. Each document, each annotation, suggested careful planning and deliberate concealment, a quiet but unmistakable sign that Samuel's disappearance might intersect with forces far larger than a single household. Despite the tension, there was a comforting rhythm to our exploration. The soft rustle of paper, the faint echo of our steps, and the occasional flicker of candlelight created a sense of intimacy with the Abbey, as though it were inviting us to uncover its secrets on its own terms. My mind traced the implications of the letters, imagining past occupants moving quietly through these halls, leaving messages and instructions for those they trusted. There was both suspense and warmth in the notion, a gentle reminder that human motives, though sometimes opaque, often leave tangible traces for the careful observer. By the time we exited the hidden study, the Abbey seemed even more alive, its whispers and shadows carrying the promise of further discovery. Holmes's mind was clearly turning over the new information, connecting patterns, and anticipating the next step in our investigation. I, meanwhile, felt the blend of excitement and comfort that comes from exploring such mysteries in the company of a keen mind and a trusted friend. The night had deepened both the tension and the companionship, leaving us poised on the edge of revelation, ready to follow wherever the Abbey's hidden corridors and concealed letters might lead us next. Chapter 6: Confrontation. The drawing-room of Eversham Abbey had transformed from a space of quiet reflection to one of measured anticipation. Holmes had requested that all members of the household gather, and one by one they arrived, bringing with them a mixture of apprehension, curiosity, and that uniquely human flair for dramatics. Lady Eversham appeared composed, though her hands clutched the folds of her gown tightly, betraying a flicker of unease. Beside her stood the steward, a man whose calm exterior seemed almost rehearsed, his gaze darting briefly toward corners of the room as if he expected shadows to answer questions before he could. Holmes surveyed the assembled company with his customary precision, noting posture, eye contact, and the subtle shifts of weight that betrayed nervousness or hidden intent. He motioned for them to take seats, then allowed a quiet pause, giving each individual a moment to settle. In the flickering glow of the firelight, the room seemed simultaneously cozy and charged with tension, as if the familiar comfort of the Abbey itself was holding its breath, waiting for the threads of conversation to pull taut and reveal hidden patterns. I observed the family's reactions closely. A young cousin fidgeted with the lace of his cuff, glancing repeatedly at the hearth as though seeking distraction from his own racing thoughts. The cook, usually so confident and jovial, had her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes darting toward the closed doors of the corridor that led to the servant quarters. Even Lady Eversham's composed demeanor carried a subtle tremor in her voice when she addressed Holmes's initial questions, a tremor that spoke of both worry and protective instinct. Each gesture, each hesitation, each carefully crafted response painted a portrait of individuals caught between propriety and fear. Holmes began his questioning with deliberate calm, inviting each person to recount their movements over the past days, their interactions with Samuel, and any unusual observations that might relate to the Bloodstone. He spoke in measured tones, his words soft but exacting, prompting detailed recollections without forcing them. I noted the interplay of human emotion and analytical observation, the way Holmes could extract information while preserving a sense of decorum, allowing the room to remain intimate and familiar even as tension quietly built. Small details emerged, subtle cues that suggested motives or possible concealments. The steward's insistence on precise timings, the cousin's repeated references to innocuous errands, and the cook's careful avoidance of certain topics, all hinted at truths layered beneath civility. Holmes, as always, observed without comment, cataloguing each anomaly, each slight exaggeration, each glance toward another person that might reveal alliance or fear. For me, the warmth of the room, firelight dancing across familiar furnishings, soft murmurs of acknowledgment between family members, tempered the growing suspense, reminding me that even in the midst of intrigue, human connection and shared spaces offered comfort. By the time Holmes concluded the initial round of questioning, the gathering had revealed as much through gestures and silences as through spoken words. Motives were hinted at, loyalties subtly suggested, and the room itself seemed to pulse with the weight of unspoken possibilities. I reflected on the delicate balance of the moment, curiosity and caution entwined, suspense and warmth intermingled, and every individual present was now a living thread in the intricate web surrounding Samuel's disappearance and the mystery of the Bloodstone. In that cozy yet charged atmosphere, I understood that the true art of investigation was not merely in uncovering facts, but in reading the quiet language of human behavior, a language Holmes had mastered, and one that promised revelations still waiting to surface. Holmes rose from his chair, the room falling into a sudden hush as all eyes turned toward him. The firelight flickered across his features, illuminating the calm intensity in his gaze. "It appears," he began, his voice measured and deliberate, "that not all is as it seems within these walls." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the room. I could feel the subtle tension coil, as if the familiar warmth of the drawing-room had been momentarily replaced by the electrifying charge of anticipation. He began with small observations, pointing out inconsistencies in the statements of those present. The steward's precise recounting of Samuel's movements contradicted a later remark regarding a late-night delivery, and the young cousin's repeated errands now seemed more like deliberate diversions than innocent chores. Holmes's analysis was precise but delivered without accusation, allowing the listeners, and us, to perceive the connections forming in his mind. Each revelation felt like a small ripple through the room, raising eyebrows, shifting glances, and quickening breaths. Then came the subtler disclosures, the hints of alliances that had remained carefully concealed. A pair of servants, whose loyalty had appeared unquestioned, had shared whispered conversations in hidden corners of the abbey, coordinating their movements in ways that suggested more than simple routine. Lady Eversham's distant cousin, previously quiet and deferential, was revealed to have knowledge of the Bloodstone's location far beyond casual interest. Holmes linked these threads with remarkable clarity, demonstrating how these secret connections intersected with the timing of Samuel's disappearance and the mysterious note we had discovered. I narrated the unfolding drama with care, noting the subtle shifts in atmosphere, the faint tightening of shoulders, the quickened exchanges of glances, and the uneasy rustling of hands on laps. Despite the tension, there was an underlying warmth in the room, a sense that each person was bound by more than suspicion, a shared history, a familiarity that softened the sharp edges of revelation. It was this balance that made the moment both thrilling and comfortingly human, a reminder that even betrayals and hidden motives could exist within a framework of care, tradition, and familial ties. Holmes's final observations tied together seemingly disparate elements into a cohesive picture. The misplaced key, the scuff marks in the passages, the bloodstone itself, and the timing of certain movements all pointed to deliberate attempts to conceal knowledge or manipulate events. Yet, he also revealed small acts of inadvertent honesty, a servant's hesitation, a cousin's unintended glance, a note left carelessly behind, all of which provided the crucial insight needed to understand the broader scheme. In this way, the Abbey's secrets were laid bare, not through force or confrontation, but through careful, meticulous deduction. As the tension began to ease, I noted the subtle foreshadowing Holmes allowed to linger. Certain questions remained unanswered, shadows of motives hinted at but unexplored, and the intricate web surrounding the Bloodstone suggested that further revelations were imminent. There was relief in the disclosure of hidden alliances and the correction of false impressions, yet the narrative momentum remained, drawing us gently forward toward the resolution still to come. In that flickering room, I felt the delicate interplay of suspense and satisfaction, the comforting reassurance of truth gradually emerging from mystery, and the quiet excitement of the final threads yet to be untangled by Holmes's unerring mind. Chapter 7. The Bloodstone Unveiled. The morning sun filtered softly through the tall windows of Eversham Abbey, casting a gentle glow across the drawing-room where Holmes and I had gathered the documents and items that promised to unravel the final thread of the mystery. The atmosphere was quieter than usual, almost reverent, as if the Abbey itself recognized the significance of the moment. Holmes moved deliberately among the scattered letters, ledgers, and small trinkets, his eyes scanning every detail with meticulous care, as though each object whispered its own secret if one knew how to listen. It was in a small, unassuming compartment behind a carved panel that Holmes first paused, his hand resting lightly upon the concealed latch. With a careful twist, the hidden space opened to reveal a collection of correspondence, yellowed and folded with the precision of deliberate concealment. Each letter was addressed to a different member of the Eversham lineage, chronicling not only the movements of the Bloodstone over generations, but also instructions for safeguarding it from those who might misuse its allure. As I read over his shoulder, I felt the weight of history pressing gently against the present, a sense of continuity that was both comforting and profound. Among the letters lay the Bloodstone itself, its deep red facets catching the morning light like a captured heartbeat. Holmes held it carefully, turning it over in his gloved hand, examining its edges and surface for marks that might indicate tampering or concealment. "Observe, Watson," he said quietly, "how the placement of this gem within the Abbey was not arbitrary. It has been hidden here precisely because its presence attracts both fascination and, unfortunately, treachery. Its concealment ensured that only those with knowledge of its legacy could locate it." I nodded, feeling a sense of relief mixed with admiration at the genius of such foresight. The mystery, long shrouded in shadows and whispers, was now tangible in our hands. Holmes then guided me through the sequence of events that explained Samuel's disappearance. Hidden compartments, secret messages, and deliberate misdirections had created a scenario that, while alarming, had been orchestrated with cunning precision rather than malice. Samuel had been temporarily concealed within a lesser-known wing of the Abbey, safeguarded by instructions only he and a trusted few could interpret. The Bloodstone had acted as both lure and signal, drawing attention while remaining secure, its very legend providing a protective layer against impulsive interference. The clarity of Holmes's explanation illuminated every shadow, every uncertainty we had encountered, and the Abbey seemed to exhale along with us, its ancient walls now witnesses to the truth laid bare. I felt a profound sense of relief as the pieces came together. The hidden letters, once enigmatic and fragmented, now formed a coherent narrative that linked past and present, myth and reality. Holmes's calm yet incisive reasoning had transformed curiosity into comprehension, suspense into understanding, and uncertainty into resolution. As the gem gleamed softly between us, I was struck by the combination of human ingenuity, historical legacy, and patient observation that had brought this resolution to light. There was satisfaction in knowing that the Abbey's secrets had been respected and that the integrity of its history remained intact. Even as the Bloodstone's fate was revealed, I could not help but appreciate the quiet artistry of its concealment. The letters, the compartments, the subtle instructions, all spoke to a careful mind's effort to protect both a precious object and the people tied to it. Holmes's eyes, though sharp and analytical, betrayed a hint of contentment, a rare warmth that softened the edge of his usual intensity. I, in turn, felt a comforting blend of admiration and gratitude, both for the resolution itself and for the serene process by which it had been achieved. In that moment, the Abbey felt alive in a new way, its shadows no longer threatening but inviting, each corner and corridor now a testament to foresight, caution, and enduring mystery finally brought to light. By the time we arranged the letters and restored the Bloodstone to its rightful place, a gentle calm settled over the room. The resolution of the long-standing mystery carried with it both relief and nostalgia, a sense that history and present were intertwined in harmonious balance. Holmes's quiet satisfaction, combined with the Abbey's own dignified silence, allowed us to linger in the warmth of understanding, knowing that the threads of curiosity, suspense, and intrigue had been unraveled with care, and that listeners, if they had been with us through every twist and turn, would feel a similar comfort in the completeness of the tale. The household gathered once more in the drawing-room, the morning sun spilling softly across familiar furniture, casting long, warm shadows that seemed to soften the tension of the previous days. Holmes had requested the presence of the individual whose subtle actions and carefully concealed movements had led to Samuel's disappearance and the temporary misplacement of the Bloodstone. The culprit entered quietly, head bowed slightly, hands clasped before them, and the room fell into a hushed stillness, attentive yet tempered by the comfort of routine and familiarity. Holmes began with measured calm, inviting the person to speak, his tone both authoritative and reassuring. "It is time to tell your story," he said softly, "to explain the reasons behind your choices and to clarify the path that led you to these actions." The individual hesitated, then began to recount the sequence of events with careful honesty. Motives emerged gradually: fear of familial disgrace, desire to protect a secret long held within the Abbey, and the weight of obligations that had seemed inescapable. Each revelation illuminated the subtle pressures that had guided decisions, transforming what might have seemed malicious into a complex interplay of human emotions, loyalties, and misjudgments. As the confession unfolded, Holmes listened with his usual patience, occasionally interjecting questions that clarified timing or intent, always maintaining a balance between inquiry and empathy. His calm, analytical presence allowed the narrative to flow naturally, and I found myself absorbed in the details: the careful planning to move the Bloodstone, the rationale behind Samuel's temporary concealment, and the means by which secrecy had been maintained without endangering anyone. The interplay of deliberate caution and human imperfection became clear, offering insight into the psychology behind actions that at first appeared purely enigmatic. I narrated quietly, reflecting on the emotions carried within the confession, the anxiety, the remorse, and the relief of finally revealing truth. There was a comforting rhythm to the story, a cadence that blended suspense with understanding, allowing listeners to feel both engaged and soothed. In hearing the motivations laid bare, one recognized that human behavior, even when flawed, often arises from fear, love, and the desire to preserve what is valued. The confession provided clarity, not only regarding the immediate mystery but also regarding the subtle dynamics of the household and the enduring weight of tradition and expectation. Holmes summarized the events with precision, connecting the confession to the evidence we had discovered: the hidden letters, the cryptic note, the scuff marks in passageways, and the strategic placement of the Bloodstone. Each element fit seamlessly into the broader narrative, confirming the accuracy of the individual's account while revealing the elegance of human reasoning intertwined with error. The satisfaction of understanding, of seeing motives and actions align with observed phenomena, created a sense of completeness that was both intellectually rewarding and emotionally comforting. By the conclusion, the tension in the room had softened into a reflective calm. The culprit's admission had resolved lingering doubts, illuminated hidden truths, and allowed the Abbey's residents, and us, to breathe more freely. I reflected on the delicate balance between justice and compassion, the ways in which human nature can mislead even the most careful observer, and the importance of understanding as well as accountability. Holmes's quiet satisfaction, combined with the warmth of shared resolution, ensured that the story's suspense had transformed into a gentle, reassuring closure. In the quiet after the confession, one could sense the Abbey itself exhaling, its long-held secrets now acknowledged, and the listeners, having accompanied us through intrigue and discovery, could relax into the comfort of a mystery fully revealed. Chapter 8. Resolution and Reflection. The morning after the resolution dawned calm and clear over Eversham Abbey, the soft sunlight spilling across the stone courtyards and warming the ivy-covered walls. Life, which had been threaded with tension and uncertainty, now moved with a comforting rhythm. Lady Eversham greeted Holmes and me in the main hall, her eyes bright with gratitude and relief. "I cannot thank you enough," she said, her voice steady yet warm, "for restoring not only the Bloodstone to its rightful place, but also the peace of this household." There was an unmistakable sense of closure in her words, a release from the invisible weight that had pressed upon the Abbey for days. Holmes, ever composed, accepted her thanks with a subtle nod, his attention already shifting to the details that still required care. The Bloodstone, now safely secured within a specially designed cabinet, caught the sunlight in deep crimson flashes, its presence both reassuring and emblematic of the restored order. I noted the delicate satisfaction that came from seeing the gem finally at rest, no longer the object of secrecy and speculation, but instead a symbol of careful guardianship and historical respect. The household itself returned to its gentle routines. Servants moved quietly through the halls, arranging furniture and attending to daily chores with renewed energy and focus. The once tense corridors now echoed with laughter and soft conversation, carrying a warmth that had been subdued during the weeks of uncertainty. Even the youngest members of the household, previously restless and anxious, found delight in simple tasks, dusting a shelf, tending to the courtyard gardens, or sharing a cup of tea by the hearth. Holmes and I observed these moments with quiet satisfaction, aware that the Abbey's restored rhythm brought both comfort and reassurance. Yet, in the midst of normalcy, subtle reminders of lingering mysteries remained. A faint creak above the staircase suggested the presence of an old floorboard that had yet to reveal its secret. A small trinket, misplaced among the shelves, hinted at the enduring quirks of human habit and the Abbey's layered history. These minor anomalies, while easily overlooked, offered gentle curiosity to the attentive observer, a reminder that even in restored order, life carried tiny, unspoken enigmas. They did not disturb the sense of peace, but instead added texture to the familiar surroundings, enriching the comfort of daily life with a hint of playful intrigue. Watson's reflections accompanied these observations, a gentle narrative that allowed listeners to savor both the resolution and the subtle reminders that life rarely unfolds without minor mysteries. The warmth of human connection, the reassuring presence of routine, and the satisfaction of seeing truth revealed created a soothing cadence, perfect for easing tension and inviting relaxation. Each detail, from the careful arrangement of letters to the soft patter of footsteps along polished floors, reinforced the Abbey's return to equilibrium while acknowledging that curiosity and wonder were never entirely extinguished. As the morning progressed, conversations resumed in cheerful tones. Lady Eversham spoke with her staff about plans for the day, the younger cousins shared anecdotes over breakfast, and even Holmes allowed himself a quiet smile as he noted the smooth functioning of the household. I, in turn, took in these moments with a sense of contentment, appreciating the balance between resolution and the small mysteries that persisted like gentle whispers in the background. In this restored environment, the Abbey felt alive but serene, familiar yet layered with depth, offering listeners the comforting knowledge that order had been returned without erasing the charm of intrigue and discovery that had defined its halls. By the time Holmes and I prepared to take our leave, the Abbey was settled into a rhythm that promised both continuity and quiet enchantment. The Bloodstone gleamed safely, the household carried on with cheerful diligence, and the faint traces of past events lingered just enough to remind one that life's minor secrets always remain, even amidst the comfort of routine. It was a peaceful, satisfying moment, filled with warmth, nostalgia, and the gentle reassurance that curiosity and discovery could coexist with harmony and calm, a fitting conclusion to the day, yet a whisper of possibilities still gently threaded through the Abbey's storied walls. The carriage rolled quietly along the misted roads that led away from Eversham Abbey, the soft clatter of wheels against cobblestones blending with the gentle sigh of the morning breeze. Holmes sat in contemplative silence, his gaze fixed on the fog-laden horizon, while I allowed my thoughts to wander over the events we had witnessed. The Abbey receded into the distance, its ivy-clad walls and towering spires now softened by the gentle shroud of mist, yet its presence lingered vividly in memory. I felt a mixture of satisfaction and nostalgia, aware that while the mystery had been resolved, its echoes would remain with us, quietly shaping our reflections. Holmes finally spoke, his voice measured but tinged with warmth. "Watson, one observes that human motives are rarely singular. Fear, loyalty, pride, and hope intertwine, creating actions that can bewilder or mislead the casual observer." I nodded, recognizing in his words the delicate balance between judgment and understanding, the insight that allowed one to navigate both mystery and human nature with empathy. There was comfort in this observation, a reassurance that even in deception or error, there existed a framework of reason and humanity that could guide one toward truth. I found myself reflecting on the intricate dance of secrecy and revelation we had witnessed within the Abbey. The Bloodstone, with its history and allure, had acted as both catalyst and lens, magnifying the subtleties of character, the quiet tensions, and the loyalties that defined the household. Each hidden note, each careful movement, each whispered conversation had offered a window into the hearts and minds of those involved. The satisfaction of uncovering these threads was accompanied by a gentle curiosity about what remained unseen, small mysteries that might never fully reveal themselves, yet added depth to the tapestry of life. Holmes, ever the observer, allowed the carriage to move in silence for a few moments before continuing. "And yet, Watson, there is a unique charm in the unknown. Not all shadows must be dispelled. Some may linger, inviting reflection and imagination." His words resonated with a quiet elegance, reminding me, and any listener accompanying us, that mystery is a companion as well as a puzzle, offering both intrigue and comfort. I found warmth in this perspective, recognizing that the unresolved elements, the faint echoes of past events, and the subtle quirks of human nature all contributed to a richer understanding of life itself. As the Abbey faded further into the morning mist, I reflected on the balance between resolution and lingering curiosity. The household had returned to its routines, order restored, and yet the faintest traces of secrecy remained, like whispers caught in the corners of familiar rooms. Holmes's methodical reasoning had illuminated the path through uncertainty, while my own reflections allowed for the gentle enjoyment of the story's human dimension, the compassion, the folly, the ingenuity, and the subtle humor that often accompanies human endeavor. It was this combination that created the enduring allure of our adventures, the intertwining of intellect and empathy, suspense and comfort. By the time we reached the outskirts of the countryside, the Abbey had become a silhouette in the mist, a memory both vivid and softened, a testament to the mysteries it held and the stories it had inspired. I felt gratitude for the experience, for Holmes's unerring guidance, and for the quiet satisfaction of witnessing human nature revealed in its most intricate forms. To the listener, I would offer the same invitation I gave myself, to savor these tales, to appreciate the warmth of resolution, yet to allow curiosity to linger, anticipating the next adventure, the next shadow, and the next story waiting just beyond the horizon. As twilight settled over the rolling hills and misted woods surrounding Eversham Abbey, the day's events gently receded into memory. The Bloodstone secrets had been revealed, the household restored to its quiet rhythm, and the abbey itself seemed to breathe more freely, its ancient walls now guardians of resolved intrigue. Holmes and I, companions in both observation and reflection, felt the calm that follows the unraveling of a carefully woven mystery, a soothing reminder that even the most tangled puzzles can find their resolution. To you, our listener, may this tale offer both comfort and quiet curiosity. Perhaps you will rest by the fireside, savor a cup of tea, or simply let your mind linger on the Abbey's shadowed corridors and hidden corners. And though this story concludes, the adventures of Holmes and Watson are never truly over. In the whispers of future mysteries, there awaits both intrigue and companionship. Until then, may curiosity and calm accompany you.